Support for this podcast is brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. We take a closer look at our human experiences and use stories to explore culture, history, and contemporary issues. You can find us on thinkwhy.org.
The first interfaith arts festival, it was called CARAVAN, on a caravan, meaning we're journeying together through the arts, Christians and Muslims, Middle Easterners and Westerners.
Hello, I'm Emmy DeGrappa. This is What's Your Why? Each week we bring you stories asking our guests the question why. We learn about their passion, why they do what they do, why should we care, and what can we learn? What better place to explore the human landscape than from the state known for its incredible landscapes, Wyoming? And what better organization than Wyoming Humanities? Serving our state for over 45 years, we share stories, ideas, and wisdom about the human experience. Welcome to What's Your Why? Today, we are talking to Paul Gordon Chandler. He is an author, interfaith advocate, art curator, social entrepreneur, and US Episcopal priest. Welcome, Paul Gordon.
Thank you. That's a mouthful, by the way, isn't it?
I know. And, I wanted to ask you, how was it that you ended up with two names, Paul-Gordon?
Well, I grew up in Senegal, West Africa, which is a francophone, French-speaking country, and they hyphenate names, Jean-Marc, Marie-Louise, etc. So hence I had the hyphenated name. But I never used it until I actually ended up working in a place where they already had a Paul G. Chandler at the place. And so part of the condition of being given the job was that I actually have to use Paul Gordon Chandler to differentiate between the two. That was about 96. So since then I've been using Paul Gordon again. But it's a mouthful. It's like a curse here in the United States,
Well, because we're not used to it.
Exactly. And often if I say, I introduce myself saying, Emmy, I'm Paul Gordon, they often think that's my last name, of course, So they'll say, well, Mr. Gordon here.
What was your first language growing up?
First language is French, and then the local language is Wolof, which is a tribal language. It's kind of the merchant language of West Africa, like the Swahili is of East Africa. But I did go to English-speaking schools, especially secondary schools. I went to a boarding school in Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast.
And how was it that your parents ended up in Senegal? Were they U.S. born? Were they African?
Yes, my parents are American, and they moved there. My father was the minister of the International Church in the capital city, Dakar, a large city. Over 1 million people at that time, and now it's even much larger, of course. And so we were there 18 years. So my first 18 years were in Senegal, West Africa.
And then you moved to the States?
Then I moved to the States, yeah.
And how was it that you got interested in art and became the director of CARAVAN? Tell us a little bit about CARAVAN first and how that became a part of your life path.
Sure. Well, obviously the two kind of major components of growing up in Senegal for me is that I was surrounded by those of another faith. Mm-hmm. Muslims. Islam is the majority faith in Senegal. About 98% of Senegal are Muslim, as is, of course, West Africa and North Africa there. And the other major component or atmosphere I was surrounded by were the arts. Senegal is a very artistic place and very creative people. The first president of Senegal after French colonialism was an outstanding poet and really bred that into the society, the arts and a value of culture. So I grew up with someone in my neighborhood his name was Youssou N'Dour, and many people know him. He's one of the world music, celebrities singing from West Africa. I think it was Sting or Peter Gabriel made him famous. So in one sense, I was passionate about building bridges between Christians and Muslims, or the Middle East and the West, and then also passionate about the arts. But they really didn't come together until I was living in Cairo, Egypt, and we lived there for 10 years. I was the rector of the Episcopal Church there, the International Episcopal Church, serving the diplomats, business persons, academics from the American University of Cairo, etc. And we were involved in a lot of East-West dialogue, or interfaith, intercultural dialogue, largely Christianity and Islam. And to be very honest with you, we just got bored with the traditional approach. Lectures, panels, discussions, same old. And you see the same people all the time at each of them. And I was conversing with, at that time, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, which is the intellectual and the spiritual heart of Sunni Islam, which are the majority of Muslims around the world, and that's based in Cairo. And we came up with this idea of using the arts. Somehow I was talking about art, etc. And we had the first interfaith arts festival. It was called CARAVAN, on a caravan, meaning we're journeying together through the arts, Christians and Muslims, Middle Easterners and Westerners. And we had about 10,000 people show up in a week. It was a citywide festival, and it took us back with the response. And of course, people that would not normally ever go to anything like interfaith dialogue or anything like that, which has the connotation of boring. And it started every year. We started doing the same thing. And then eventually, that was in 2009 that we had our first arts festival, East-West Arts Festival. And then in 2013, after the revolution in Egypt, and when the president was overthrown and all of that, public art became a way to express how people were feeling. So we thought we'd tap into that, and we had 50 life-size fiberglass painted donkeys. And the donkey, of course, symbolizes, everybody loves donkeys, right? But the donkey symbolizes peace in Christianity and Islam. Jesus comes into Jerusalem on a donkey. Omar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliph in Islam, comes into Jerusalem on a donkey. All young Muslims learn that story. So the idea was this is a symbol of peace, the donkey. It's also a symbol of compassion, because the poorest of the poor use donkeys around the world, especially in Egypt. So we had these 50 donkeys painted by premier artists from around the Middle East. Each received a donkey, life-size, and they were all around Cairo, okay? And saying that the way forward for all of us is in peace and with compassion toward the other. And then we took all these donkeys to London, to St. Paul's Cathedral, and lined them up in a caravan in the direction between Jerusalem and Mecca, symbolically. And there were about 100,000 people that came to see them at St. Paul's Cathedral while they were on display there over 2 months. And that's when CARAVAN, as an organization, was developed, and, as opposed to just being this initiative. And it's a 501c3 here in the United States. And the goal is to use the arts to build bridges between the Middle East and West. It's a peace-building arts organization, nonprofit.
That's an amazing beginning.
Yeah, it was a great beginning, for us. And we still get many people saying, are there any donkeys left? And there are not.
So just to go back a little bit, you became an Episcopal priest before you founded CARAVAN.
Yes. I've been an Episcopal priest since 1993.
And what was your desire to do that? Because you grew up in a Muslim country?
No, and that wasn't why. My father was a minister, and I remember thinking I would never do something. Of course, as you journey through life, various things shape you and speak to you, and I felt led to join the Episcopal Church and serve in that context. And I found the Episcopal Church being an all-embracing, all-inclusive type of community. And the way they looked at the other, and that was very important to me because I'd grown up around the other, in quotes, was critical. And so it was the right kind of environment and platform for me to address a lot of these issues of peace building. And so CARAVAN just grew out of one of the churches that I served in the Middle East, and that was the one that I last served in, and that was in Cairo, Egypt. And we were there from 2003 to 2013. And
where did you get your degree from?
I went to seminary in England,
okay.
in Chichester, the city of Chichester.
And what do you think is the biggest misconception that Muslims and Christians face between each other, between their faiths, that we really need to build a bridge and have understanding? Because is it language? Is it culture? Is it the faith itself? What exactly is that?
I mean, obviously, fear and of the unknown is just that. It's the unknown. And so there are so many misunderstandings of our Muslim brothers and sisters simply because we're not familiar, and we hear the media which hypes up and misportrays. I mean, rarely is there a positive portrayal of a Muslim in the media. And yet the irony is that we have so much in common. The way I like to think of it is, do you know the symbol, the Islamic symbol of faith? The Christian symbol of faith, of course, is the cross. The Islamic symbol of faith is the crescent. And when you see a crescent in the sky, the majority of the moon is dark. Mm-hmm. And for the sake of an illustration, I would say that little crescent is what we have different between us and our Muslim brothers and sisters. But the majority of the moon, the dark side of the moon, is what we have in common. And the challenge for us is to build our relationships with each other on that dark side of the moon, a la Pink Floyd. You remember Pink Floyd? He had that. He was well ahead of his time in that sense. But I think, in other words, build on the commonalities and learn those commonalities. Learn what they are. And as you do that, you begin to realize how similar we are. And it goes with our Muslim brothers and sisters. It's the same issue as well. They have a very little understanding often of how similar we are as well. And so education needs to take place on both sides.
Do you feel there's a distinct difference between a Muslim who grows up in the United States versus a Muslim who grows up in the Middle East in terms of how they view themselves as Muslims and their culture? Do you think
Actually, not necessarily. No. I find often the most open Muslim friends I have are in the Middle East, and the most all-embracing, the most generous in the way they look towards those different than themselves. So I think it relates to the individual as opposed to geography, very much so.
Do you think ISIS and the extreme groups like that have destroyed so much of what could be happening between the Christians and the Muslims?
No question, absolutely. I think because ISIS, which is of course, and similar militant groups, not just ISIS, are extreme minorities within Islam, and yet they get all the attention. And of course, rightly, they get the attention because what they do is so violent. And our media is drawn to that kind of thing, the sensational. But it presents a real challenge for our Muslim brothers and sisters, the majority, of course, because for them, they suffer the most. And the interesting thing about ISIS is who are suffering the most under ISIS? They're other fellow Muslims, not Westerners, not Christians, though, yes, they have suffered, and other minority faiths. But the majority of those suffering under any kind of terrorism or any kind of militant Islam are other Muslims. So, yes, it's a challenge, very much so, and of course a lot of Islamic leaders are increasingly speaking out. Part of the challenge is that they speak out in Arabic, that's their language, which of course doesn't come over here. We don't hear it very much. I'm often, after I give a lecture on Christian-Muslim relations, one of the questions is, why are Muslim leaders not speaking out? And I want to say they are speaking out, but the thing is we just don't hear it, because it's from another world, another language, and to translate that both culturally and linguistically over here is a challenge, and it doesn't happen often.
Very difficult.
Yeah, very much so. So often, as I mentioned to someone I was just talking with a minute ago, before we started this interview, I think what's important is that we, as much as possible, experience the other. So a lot of the work we do with CARAVAN, which is using the arts to bridge between Christians and Muslims and between the Middle East and West, is to give an experience of the other. And that begins to kind of reshape the worldviews and challenge our thinking and the assumptions that we have and these erroneous stereotypes. Because we all change by experience.
True.
Very
Tell
much
me
so.
about your experience, or not your experience, your work as an author.
Yes. It's interesting. There are writers and there are authors. And meaning I would see myself as an author. Of course, you have to write to be an author. But I write. There are actually projects that I embark on that become books. And the last one is titled In Search of a Prophet, A Spiritual Journey with Khalil Gibran. Khalil Gibran was the Lebanese-born poet-artist who is well known for his best-selling book, The Prophet, which is actually still sells about 1 million copies a year. And the West, often when I give lectures on book lectures right now, and I'll ask for a raising of hands of how many in this room, and sometimes you have 200 or 300 people, have actually been influenced at one time in their life by The Prophet, the book The Prophet that Gibran wrote. Sometimes it's 95%, raise their hand. Yet very few know much about him. And he was this fascinating and profound figure from which we have a tremendous amount to learn, especially in terms of bridging between the Middle East and West. And so I embarked on this journey and exploration, really looking deeply into Khalil Gibran's life. He died in 1931. and of course spent most of his life after he immigrated in Boston and New York City. And I went all over the world. It took me from Bishari up in the mountains of Lebanon, where I was last week, interestingly, for a conference about Gibran, all the way to Mexico City, where the largest collection of Gibran's writings and art are held at the Sumaya Museum there. And every place you can imagine in between, taking Gibran with me, going to every place he lived or the places that he's influenced, and taking his writings with me and reading them in the order that he wrote them, everything he wrote, in the order that he wrote them at each respective place that he wrote them. And so it was a long journey for me, because it was almost finding a way for allowing his spirit, if you want to put it that way, the ethos of what he was writing and speaking on, to soak in it, and then out of that share what I think we can learn from his life.
Is he respected by both Muslims and Christians alike?
Very much so. Actually, most Muslims around the Middle East, which of course are the majority of people in the Middle East, don't even think of him as whether he was Christian or Muslim. They just know that he was this profoundly spiritual, mystical, and beautiful writer from Arab tradition.
What do you think was his greatest gift in being able to bridge those cultures, and not even just be the bridge, but just be someone who people don't put in a box?
Yes. It's interesting. What I wanted to do was what intrigued me the most in looking at his life was how here he is, someone born into, at that time in Lebanon, a sectarian, exclusive, intolerant Christian community, and ending up becoming someone who not only embraced all in our world, but as a result of that was embraced by all. And I think that is where his secret is in many ways. And he shows us the oneness of humanity, and it's beautiful.
I have another question for you, because I love that you call yourself a social entrepreneur. What does that mean?
That's a good question. What does that mean? I think it means that you're creatively entrepreneurial, but for humanitarian purposes, as opposed to for-profit purposes or business purposes. And you just keep creating and pushing the boundaries of possibilities, but toward a deeper purpose.
Right. So it's more towards the betterment of society or of humankind.
Of humanity. Right. Right. Hence the peace-building theme for me, very much so.
Right.
In showing us what we have in common and facilitating greater harmony in our world, and which I think is critically needed, very much so.
What is your message to young people today?
That's a good question. Well, one of the reasons I wrote this book, by the way, is because he's very much known by my age and older, and I'm 53 here in the West, but he's not so known, Gibran, by the younger generation, even though they resonate profoundly often with his worldview, that of being all-embracing, looking generously and kindly on the other, etc. And but the message I would say is, the challenge I would say is to encourage friendships with the other, however that comes about. Whether it means you need to go somewhere, that means befriending someone in your community that's very other than yourself. Because the way I like to see it is this: our world is this beautiful, divine, if you will, global mosaic. And each little chip, each little piece in that mosaic is a different cultural expression of life. And we're only whole, we're only complete when all of those little pieces are present. And ultimately, we all want wholeness, however one sees that. And I think it's fundamental that we associate with those that are very different than ourselves to complete ourselves.
That is a great view, and also a great goal to have, to really look at life as each of us fill in one colorful piece of that puzzle that makes up humanity. Do you have any parting words for us?
Well, I like this. This exhibition that we're here for right now with CARAVAN at the Center for the Arts is the Middle East coming to the Wild West. And, of course, some of the Middle Easterners will be here as they are for the opening night. And they'll learn, of course. It's not just us learning from them. It's them learning from us. It's an exchange. So I would just say keep an open heart, keep an open mind. And I think the thing I'm always most impressed with is the value of kindness. What was it that one of the old desert fathers said, treat everyone gently because everyone that you encounter is facing a personal battle or something like that. And it's true. There's a sense we all are struggling and journeying through life, and we have the highs and lows. But look kindly on the other. And I think in doing so, we ourselves will be transformed.
That's excellent advice and wisdom. Thank you so much, Paul Gordon.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Very much so.
Thank you for listening. I'm Emmy DeGrappa. This Think Why podcast is brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. We use the humanities as a lens to explore the human experience. You can find us online at thinkwhy.org.